A young woman recently asked me whether, in view of my advanced age, I now regarded myself as fully mature. And while I would have loved to reply, of course, what else? My honest answer had to be, well, often, sometimes, maybe. I'm still working on it. I then read her this poem from my book, Unexpectedly 80. When I see a young woman strolling down the street with her gleaming hair, glowing skin, and impeccable thighs, evoking from the passing male population some appreciative glances, some longing sighs, some politically incorrect but rave reviews, and when I notice that none of these fellas is taking notice of me in my elasticized waistband pants and my comfortable shoes, I mobilize the wisdom of a lifetime and tell my envious heart, been there, done that, calling upon my memory's rich store, to which my envious heart replies recalcitrantly, unreasonably, but I want to be there again and do that some more. So, fully mature is not what I am, though I've worked on it all of my life and written about it all of my writing life, and repeatedly revisited in my life and my prose and my verse the issues of love and marriage and the family, of loss and control, and age and the body's decline, and of the various ways in which we change and remain the same over the years. I went back and looked through my books of poems over the decades. It is clear that while life imposes a lot of changes on us over the decades, there are parts of us, of our character, our core, our true self, that seem to be inexorably permanent. And one of those permanent parts of me I've regretfully had to conclude is being an A-plus, world-class champion warrior. I reread my book of 40s poems, and I came across the line, at 3 in the morning, I used to be sleeping in untroubled sleep in my bed, but lately at 3 in the morning, I'm tossing and turning, awakened by hypochondria and gas, and nameless dread, whose name I've been learning. And then I turned to my 50s book, where I've noted with some anxiety that terrorists blow us to pieces on foreign vacations, and muggers and rapists attack us right on our own street, and we're not even safe from harm, locked up in our house with a burglar alarm, with lead in the water and carcinogens in our meat. In my 60s book, I'm still at it, complaining that I can't sleep because, and I quote, I'm unable to push my 10,000 anxieties back. In my 70s book, I describe myself as awake in our double bed, worried about some meteorite that might crash into the earth and other matters inspiring major dread. And now, in my 80s book, I continue what looks like a lifelong tradition of sleepless worrying. I'm going to read you just the first verse of a very worried poem called Insurance, Eternity, John Quincy Adams, Polar Bears, Lab Tests, and so forth. The clock in our bedroom says 2:17 in the morning. I want to be sleeping, except I am thinking about what I should serve at our dinner party next Friday. Do we remain in the market or get the hell out? Whether the grandchildren know not to go with a stranger? Whether I ought to consider replacing my knees? If it is actually true that my lab tests are normal, or is nobody telling me I have a fatal disease? By the end of this sleepless night, the things I have worried about include whether I now have too much or too little insurance, how to keep polar bears from being destroyed, why all other mothers get calls from their sons every Sunday, plus the briefness of life and eternity, also the void. And like all of us who are A-plus world-class worriers, I've learned that I'll never run out of things to worry about, and also I'll never stop being a worrier. I've also learned, on the other hand, that as we grow older, there are plenty of changes we're going to have to make or adapt to, some of which we will do with grace and good humor, and others with bitching and moaning and pain and tears. Among those adaptations, as all of us long-married people know, is coming to terms, if we're going to keep being married, with the ever-evolving issue of married life. I've written a ton of poems about marriage and how we adjust to it over the years, and here are two more, both from my 80s book. The first one is called Easier. It's easier to read in an empty room and sleep all by yourself in a double bed if you know that he's just out of town. It's easier to scramble a single egg and sit up alone to watch the nightly news if you know that he'll be coming home. It's easier to buy a ticket for one and go solo to a movie or a play if you know that he'll soon be around to complain, interrupt, disagree, leave his hair on the soap, leave the dresser drawers open, be picky, be a pain in the ass, be yours. The second poem is called 50 Years Later, and it's sort of in honor of the fact that this is the year my husband and I have been married for 50 years. I'll accept nothing less than a Purple Heart. Each morning, we brush side by side in our double sink bathroom and share Metamucil along with our multigrain toast. We search yet again through the house for our disappeared glasses so we can read all the bad news in the Times and the Post. He's 9:45 and I'm 10 at the dermatologist, which will follow by grocery shopping at Trader Joe's. Tomorrow we'll sign up for classes in senior Pilates, then it's off to assisted living to see Cousin Rose. Together we meet with our broker to get reassurance that we'll die before there's no money to cover the bills. Then we meet with our tax accountant to check on our broker. Then we meet with the lawyer to write a few codicils. He knows when he goes for his CAT scan that I'll gladly take him. I know when I go for some blood work, he'll come and he'll wait. These are not like the torrid times on that beach in New Jersey, but a date is a date. Well, running errands and reading the papers together and visiting Cousin Rose are clearly light years away from the high octane, heart-pounding tumult of young love, that passionate intensity which once upon a time we defined as happiness. But as I said, a date is a date, even maybe especially after 50 years. And those simple pleasures of everyday living are how we at 80 are gratefully redefining married life, married love, and happily ever after. I suppose a cynic could say, so what are our options? But I think that we're choosing to act like adults, demonstrating a certain degree of maturity as we face the realities of unexpectedly 80. And another of these realities is the fact that our driving skills are not quite what they used to be. This is a problem we've started to notice even before our kids began making snide comments like, is there some special reason you're parking in the middle of the street and not at the curb? And while never conceding that they have a point, we, like a lot of our friends, have been slowly, reluctantly coming to grips with this issue. And here's a poem about it from the 80s book called Driving at Night. December dinner parties do not thrive unless the dinner party ends at 5. Nor do we go to operas or ballets unless we're ticketed for matinees? And when we take our grandkids on the town, we must get back before the sun goes down. Our social life is suffering from blight as, one by one, we cease to drive at night. We sensibly accept that we must squint whenever we confront the finer print. We know our blusher cannot be applied unless our mirror's triple magnified. We count on bifocals to mend the blur that sometimes makes a him look like a her. But when the day is done, we're out of sight as one by one we cease to drive at night. Our new best friends may lack both charm and spark, but they can see the road when it is dark. The widows bypass prepossessing guys for schlumps possessed of 20/20 eyes. And when it's evening and we're needing cars, we'd pick up fellas if we could in bars. We've grown to fear the fading of the light as one by one we cease to drive at night. Well, you know. What happens is that we are trying to make peace with a lot of different tough truths, which include, among other things, the acquisition of yet more prescription drugs, a constantly expanding team of medical experts for ailments we'd prefer not to know exist, and of course, the continuing decline and fall of various parts of the body. Or, as I put it in my 80s book with a nod to Robert Frost, whose breasts those are, I think I know. But have they always hung so low? There is nothing like a look in the mirror before you've sucked in your stomach and held up your chin to remind you that 80 is 80 and not the new 60. But if that glance in the mirror hasn't made it unmistakably clear, here's another poem to explain in considerable detail how I know I'm old. I remember running boards, Victrolas, Frigidaires, and when the really, really rich were merely millionaires, and when it still was legal to start classes with school prayers. There was both good and bad in days of yore, but they don't write songs like Stardust anymore. I remember double features and the Lindy Hop and sipping chocolate malteds at the local soda shop. And when J. Edgar Hoover was our most admired cop. There were things both to cherish and deplore, but they don't write songs like Stardust anymore. I remember our gal Sunday on the radio and watching television when the show was mostly snow, and staying out of swimming pools because of polio. Yes, sometimes after's better than before, but they don't write songs like Stardust anymore. I remember garter belts, long gloves, and the new look. And going all the way, I read about it in a book. And when a homemade onion dip made you a gourmet cook. We've learned what to embrace and to ignore, but they don't write songs like Stardust anymore. I remember back when hats were worn with business suits, when women did the housework and their husbands the commutes, when blackberries and apples were regarded just as fruits. But what I'd like to ask is progress for when they don't write songs like Stardust anymore. I also know I'm old because Milton and I have now acquired our 8th grandchild, and we're hoping to be allowed to spoil him rotten. This, by the way, is something we keep being told we should not do by our 3 local grandchildren's far more rigorous parents, our son Alexander and his wife, who complain that we give their kids too much candy, allow them to stay up too late, buy them too much, and discipline them too little. Well, I've got a reply to that. It's a poem called Among My Grandchildren. While I may point out from time to time that cheating at pickup sticks deprives them of that inner satisfaction they can only achieve by playing fair and square, And while from time to time I may deliver a little lecture on not hurting people's feelings and changing their underpants, and while I would never hesitate to prohibit the waterboarding of younger brothers or discourage discussions of farting during meals, I've decided that for the most part, it is not my responsibility to improve my grandchildren's character or their hygiene. Nor am I going to urge them to eat their vegetables or tell them they need to look people straight in the eye or remind them to pick up their toys and use a tissue, not their sleeve, and stop interrupting. And though I hope they'll be taught to be modest, responsible, generous, patient, and help set the table, this isn't my job. For I have chosen to be a 3 desserts grandmother. A yes, you can watch another video, grandmother. A why don't we just forget your bath tonight, grandmother. A clap and cheer and shower praise on them, grandmother. A grandmother who seditiously whispers in her grandchild's ear, "Don't tell your mom I let you do this, she'll kill me." A grandmother who insists that it is the duty of the older generations to improve and instruct the younger generations, except when I'm among my grandchildren. Now, grandchildren, it is well known, are viewed as one of our great compensations as we make our way through the third of our life. They're a source of vast pride and pleasure, and they give us the opportunity to see the world brand new again through their eyes. But after we've counted up grandchildren, Medicare, senior fares, senior discounts, and Social Security, we may be tempted to think, that's it for the good stuff. But while I surely agree that there are plenty of rotten things that happen at the age of 80, and please don't let me count the ways, I insist that there's still a lot of good news too. And while I have no intention of launching into a merry little talk on the joys of family and friendship and music and books and oceans and wine and the view out your window, I'd like to end with a status report that I'm hoping will apply to some, to most, to maybe every 80-year-old in this room. Too old to dream, too old to flirt, too old to sit and dish the dirt, too old to drink, too old to pet, too old to boogie, not quite yet. Thank you.
Okay,
Susan.
Hi. So as we were all laughing, I was thinking the reason that we laugh is because we recognize ourselves in so much of what you write and say. And I wondered how you sort of sift through and decide, exactly what to write in terms of, which things work and which things don't.
Well, I spent a lot of time talking to my women friends. We do a lot of analyzing, reflecting, complaining, and I think what I write about is really the distilled stories that I hear from them, that I tell to them, the things that are on our minds. If I go to a party, I would like to wear something that nobody else is wearing, but when I'm writing, I want to write about what connects to other people, what we all share, not what's different about us, what's the same about us.
You reveal so much of yourself, and some people aren't so willing to do that. Do you think about that?
Of course I think about that all the time. I think I reveal exactly what I want to reveal and no further. I think there's a lot that I'm very comfortable with revealing. I have a very clear sense of privacy, and I also have to be considerate of other people's privacy. When I wrote a book about my son Alexander staying with us, he and his wife and 3 children staying with us for 3 months, and I mentioned to him that I was going to write a book about it, there was this dead silence on the phone, and he said, "What do you mean you're writing about us?" I say, "I always write about my children." He said, "Mom, we're not your children anymore." And I actually had to make a deal with him in which I said, I'm not going to show this book to my agent. I'm not going to show it to even tell my editor I'm writing it. And you get to read it. You and your wife get to read it. And if you don't want me to publish it, you don't have to give me a reason why I just won't do it. And the family trumps writing. And it was not a book that really, I thought, invaded his privacy. I thought it was an ode to his divine parenting and his divine children. But he didn't quite see it that way.
So in other words, we have not seen that book.
No, that book, first he called up and he said, no, I don't want you to publish it. And then he called me 10 minutes later and said, I can't live with that. Go ahead.
Oh.
So it is published.
Oh, so that's not there. Well, so actually, have there been books you've written that you haven't published? Or are there poems that get discarded all the time? Or are there...
No, there are things that I write down that I look at carefully and decide whether it's going to cross a line. I mean, I am a writer. I am not a blogger. I am not a public diary keeper. And I have respect for my own privacy and for the privacy of the people in my family.
Yeah, that question of being a blogger, where it's all out there is really...
Yeah, I don't do that.
Do you read it?
Who can find it on my computer? I just learned to download. That's enough for this year.
Okay. Speaking of your children, how do like Alexander and his terrible, very bad, excuse me for not knowing the exact wording,
That's
but
okay.
how did a book like that, that's such a classic and so wonderful, come about?
Well, that book, Alexander and the Terrible, Horrible, No Good, Very Bad Day, I wrote it for him because he had more than his share of rotten days. I mean, he's the only person I ever heard of who came limping home from preschool, I guess it was, saying, oh, I killed my knee. And I said, poor baby. And soccer, he said, no, I fell off the chair in story time. You know, I mean, got a knee injury getting told a story. I mean, this is a kid who had a lot of things happen to him. So I knew that the concept of a bad day was a helpful one for adults. It's a container concept. A bad day means there's a beginning and there's an end, and maybe tomorrow will be better. And that I thought writing about a bad day would cheer him up. I read it to him in manuscript form. He was outraged. He said, why are you giving me this bad day? Why don't you give it to Nick? Why don't you give it to Tony? Why me? So I told him he was 4. Okay. And I said, you know, it was like I gave him this bad day. So I said, you know, the book isn't published yet. We can change it to Walter or Stanley, but then your name won't be in great big letters in the front of the book. Manipulative mommy that I was. And he said, keep it Alexander.
But for the rest of his life, he's been Alexander of the...
Well, I have a feeling that in the years between 4 and the time he got married, he was using that book the way the gentlemen in the 19th century used their etchings. Want to come up and see my children's book, honey? So
have you heard about my very bad day?
I think it worked out for him.
Oh, that's great. That's great. But so how much of his story is actual and how much of it is from your mind?
It's a combination. It's like taking pieces of my imagination and pieces of his reality and putting him almost in a kaleidoscope, shaking it up like that and see what patterns get made.
Okay.
You know, that's fiction.
Right.
It's fiction. What's the truth is the experience of bad days. And I know that's the truth because I have been deluged over the decades with letters from kids saying, you call that a bad day? Telling me about theirs.
So Australia was not exactly his, or was it?
No.
But it's very interesting, the whole question of process and where you find your muse, both for yourself and you were saying with your friends and with your... But I wondered whether your study of psychology actually played into some of this as well.
Well, I mean, in a funny way. I mean, I use my study of psychology all the time, and probably not consciously and deliberately. It's like a well that I dip into, and it just nourishes me without my particularly thinking about it. When I wrote Necessary Losses, I had one, I had one experience which resulted in my writing a children's book. I was interviewing latency age girls between 7 and 11. I wanted to hear about their lives. And they were telling me what great lives they had at that age, that they were free to do all kinds of things on their own, and they had all kinds of competencies. The world was opening up for them. But there was only one thing that was completely destroying their happiness, turning their lives into a living hell. And that was that their parents would not let them get their ears pierced.
Go ahead, I know exactly the book.
And I heard about that so much, I said, there is a book here called Earrings, about a kid who wants earrings.
I was going to ask you that because I gave in and got the earrings.
They all give in. They all give in.
And
nobody does.
What I wanted to ask you was, well, you didn't have a daughter, so you didn't have to hold off.
But I did know, Alexander got his ears pierced. One ear pierced. I think I had to pick my husband off the floor on that one. Wasn't quite ready for it, but he did have, when he went to business school, he took out the earring.
So you were telling me earlier, when we were talking before, that you were telling that on a trip to Maine, there's a wonderful Maine story and poem in this book. On a trip to Maine, you were telling the kids stories to keep them busy, and one turned into a children's book.
Yeah.
So what's the difference between a great story that you make up on the spot, and what does it take to get it to a children's book?
Well, this was not a great story that I told on the spot. It was the kernel of a possibly good story if I sat down and worked on it. I mean, it was a story about a little girl. It's my newest children's book, and it may be my favorite children's book. It's called Lulu and the Brontosaurus, about a really bratty little girl, and who decides she wants a Brontosaurus for a birthday present. And as I was telling it to my grandsons, Benjamin and Nathaniel, they were very excited about it. There was a little chant in it. I'm gonna get a Brontosaurus for a pet. When I saw them sort of marching around this rented living room, chanting this song, I thought, there's something here. Well, that's just the beginning. Then you go home and you write and you write and you write and you throw out and you write some more. But I had the feeling that there was a good story in there, and it turned out to be so.
Your writing in your children's books is different from your writing in your adult poetry, which is different from your writing in Necessary Losses, or your psychological books. Can you talk about having those different styles, and does it satisfy you to change around, or is it different parts of your life when you do one or another?
I love writing in all the different modes. I love the compression of poetry. I love digging into the little kid in myself for the children's books. I love the serious research that's required for my psychology books. But I'll tell you, everything I write about is the same thing, even though I write in different voices and stand in different size shoes. I write about the feelings that we experience, what's going on inside us, and what's going on in our relationships with other people. And I can take children's poems and adult poems and show you how they're really the same poem. And then I can point to you a paragraph in my psychology book on which it talks about sibling rivalry, which will have bearing on a poem for adults I wrote about sibling rivalry and a book I wrote for kids about it. So that even though I range far and wide in my forms, the content basically remains the same. What goes on inside us, what goes on in our relationships with other people.
Yeah, in Necessary Losses, you talked a little bit about your relationship with your sister, and I wondered how much that informed your thinking about all of this.
My sister inspired writings of mine of sibling rivalry. I think I got over it when I was about 40.
I haven't gotten over anything.
No rush.
So does anyone ever say, don't write about this as they're chatting with you?
Well, I think my friends are very trusting of the fact that I throw up so much of a smoke screen if I use anything that they tell me that they are never, ever, ever going to be revealed. Once I wrote an article about head lice, and my friend, she said, I don't care, you can't use any name. You cannot use any name. You cannot just call me X. So they'll figure out it's my children if you, no matter what name you mention. So she was X in my article, but most of the time people trusted me to protect them. And you know, I'm not really, when I'm taking a walk with a girlfriend, sort of taking notes on this for my next book or article. It just sort of sifts into me. It's what I'm living more than what I'm researching.
That's a difference from journalists, because they're always saying, there's a good story for the newspaper. I mean, it's
that, you're right.
Don't you think that's often the case?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And which is what I grew up with. So actually, probably as a fiction writer, you kind of sift it and you make composites and you shape it.
You're allowed to do that. I mean, if I'm writing when I'm writing about case histories and necessary losses or imperfect control, I'm a stickler for accuracy of quotes and everything else. Though, as I said, I cover up who the person is. But outside of that, if I'm writing a poem, that's not journalism.
So is with your writing, do you find that psychologically you're trying to instruct people in some ways? I mean, what kind of, in some ways I feel like we're all learning from your honesty in your books.
I'm very bossy and I love to give advice. But I really try very hard to talk about what is being experienced and letting other people draw the lesson from that. I mean, Necessary Losses was not a how-to-do-it book. It was a, here's how we live, here's how other people live. You can read about this and think about your own lives. Do your own work, use this to do your own work. And, even with poems that I write, it's use it to figure out your own life. I'm not going to tell you how to do it, much as I might love to.
Yeah. What do you like to read?
Everything. I am a maniacal reader. What have I read recently? Read the Jonathan Franzen book. Oh. Read the three.
I did too.
The Three Wisemans of Westport. Read the new John le Carré. I have a group of 8 women friends who've been meeting for almost 30 years, and we have a study group for poetry. And we take turns being the teacher. We meet once a month, not on a regular date, but on a date when we can all come. And somebody's the teacher and does a little research. And, we read everything from the new translation of the Odyssey to Eliot to Billy Collins to whatever. And it's an absolute incredible joy in my life. If I had 6 months to live, I would not give up my poetry group. We love it. And I have another group of 4 couples. We just recently spent 3.5 years reading the entire James Joyce Ulysses out loud. I mean, I tried 3 times to read that book on my own, and I found it too hard a struggle, but it was, an amazing experience to read it aloud. So I read everything.
This being American Jewish University, I just wondered if Judaism plays a part in your life.
Well, I grew up with virtually no Jewish background, except that I knew I was a Jew. Never had Passover until I was 21 at somebody's house. So I am actually much more Jewish in my household than my parents were. I think my husband was certainly an influence on me there because he came from a more observant family. So, for instance, we belong to a temple. We certainly have Passover. I've already been shopping for Hanukkah, and we go to temple on the high holidays. And had all of the kids bar mitzvahed because I really want my kids to feel that in addition to their friends and their family, that they are in the context of a Jewish history, which can be very sustaining for them. So in that sense, I am a Jew.
And also in your anxiety.
Oh, yes. Forgot about that. Correct.
Poets that you read as well. The Frost poem that you referred to in the piece, it really does follow line for line.
Yes, it's stopping by the woods on a snowy evening. It's the exact same rhyme scheme and pattern of the Frost poem. I did that for my own entertainment. I had a very good time doing it.
It's wonderful to see, and actually I went and compared them. Are there other poets that you've emulated in that way, or
well,
or
in this book, I have one with Dylan Thomas. The rhyme scheme is in reverse, but it's the same pattern. I really did it just for my own amusement. I figured, what the hell, I'm 80, I can do anything I want.
And the other thing I was thinking is that being 80 is sometimes a time when people slow down a little bit. Doesn't sound like that's happening.
Oh, I think it has. I used to, I was never finished with a book before I had another one lined up, another book contract to do this one, to do that, to do the next. My husband the same way. We still are writers. We're always going to write. I don't think you're never going to retire as a writer, right? You don't retire. But I give myself more time between books. I don't have to be writing something every minute. And, I have 7 grandchildren. When I'm with those kids, I am 100% with them. There is nothing else going on in my head and in my life. I can be with them because I'm not also writing a book and trying to live a very demanding life as I did when I was raising my own kids. So I would say that definitely slow down, definitely listening to the music and smelling the roses, and I love it.
Why don't we let people start coming up if anyone has questions?
I'm thinking of writing a story about a friend. We've been friends since our mothers were 16, and they were pregnant with us together. So that's a long history. And I'm thinking of writing a story for the Modern Love section of the New York Times. And I'm wondering, it's not going to be a negative story, but I'm wondering, would you suggest that I write it and send it, or ask her if she minds if I write something about our lives?
Why don't you write it and then show it to her, and then send it?
Great.
Then it won't be you're writing something about her life. Your life. She'll see what you're writing, and maybe she'll say, 90% I'm comfortable with, 10% I'm not. I think that it won't kill you to write a story that doesn't get published if it doesn't get published, or she says no. But give her a chance to see the finished product.
And listen to what she says.
Yes.
And if she should say, I don't think it at all, then I need to respect that.
I hope so.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
So how much do you read your work aloud? It seems like the tone is always really perfect in terms of
I read everything aloud. I need to hear how it sounds. I'm very, very conscious of the beat of a sentence. When I'm edited, I tell my editors, you can take out a word, you can change things, but I have to put the beat back in. I have to find a way to put the beat back in because the rhythm gets changed if you take out a the or an over here. So I read it out loud because I need to hear the beat of it.
And that's the poetry that you talk about?
No, everything.
No, with everything.
Everything.
Wow. Even a book as dense as
Oh,
this.
absolutely, absolutely.
That's
Every sentence, I have to hear it out loud.
Huh. And do you often do readings before a book is published? Do you do that ever?
No, I just read it out loud to myself, and Milton reads practically everything that I write, so I get another, pair of eyes on it. But I don't do readings.
So do you both work at home?
Yes.
Right? Can you talk a little bit about that? How that works with the?
It has worked out pretty well, considering that we've been doing it for 50 years, and I think. To be perfectly honest, one of the reasons it works out well having two writers in the family is that we work totally different sides of the street. I do not write about the Middle East. He does not write children's books. We have our own areas, and we don't. I think we have enough competitive blood rushing through our veins that it might be a problem if we were both writing about the same kinds of things. We used to have a few little testy moments when we read each other's stuff. I would give him my poems to read, and he would read them, and he'd say, "Very funny." I'd say, "So why aren't you laughing?" He'd say, "You asked me to critique, not to laugh. That's my job." Or he would give me something, and I'd say, I don't know, I have no idea where this is." And he says, "Any idiot knows where that is." That did not work out very well either. So we have learned to speak more kindly to each other and more sensitive to each other's feelings about our writings.
So do you get up in the morning and have breakfast and then go off to your offices and then come?
Well, more or less. I mean, if I am passionately into something that I'm writing, I'm an instant waker-upper. I open my eyes and I am awake. And if I'm excited about something that I'm working on, I can get right out of bed, not brush my teeth, not have coffee. I'm in my nightgown. I can walk into my office and just start writing. And sometimes I have to say to myself, if I've got other things to do, I say, "Judy, don't start." Because if I start, it may be 5 hours before I can stop. But that's when I'm really hot on the trail of something that's coming together. For the most part, Milton makes me a great cup of coffee and a little Danish, and he has breakfast, and then we go to work.
Do you write every day?
What I do is when I'm on a project, I'm obnoxiously disciplined. I'm just really loathsomely disciplined. So that when I wrote Necessary Losses, I gave myself 3 years to write it. I divided the work up year by year, month by month, week by week, certain amount to do every day.
Wow.
When I was writing, I would have a rule: 1 page researched and written a day. Sounds like very little. It's 275 words, but that's 7 pages a week. That you add that up at the end of a year, you get a lot of pages. And I just did it. And if I got it done early, I could go shopping at Saks or do whatever I pleased. But I had to do my work. If I went to visit a friend in New York, I worked with a pad and a pencil, and before I went out to the museums or whatever I was going to do, I would sit in my friend's dining room at her table and write my page. But I got my chance to write at the same time as I had my first child. And I've been wanting, get to write to be published. I've been wanting to write my entire life. Started when I was 7, not got a word published until I was in my 30s. And when I got a chance to write, I was just going to make it happen and be a mommy. So that meant total, relentless discipline. And I had it. I can write anywhere, under any circumstances. I have even, when a gynecologist kept me waiting, I swear to you, I was on my back with my legs in stirrups, and I was writing.
That is going to be the most memorable.
Don't think about it in too much detail.
I think that every writer finds their rhythm, but I. But no, I think that kind of discipline. What you're saying is that it's a pleasure, but it's also work.
Absolutely. I mean, I always used to think that my mother was my inspiration because my mother was such a passionate reader of books and loved poetry and recited poetry and read. And then I realized, it's a package. It's also my father, the accountant. My father, who got up every day and went to the office and did his job, no matter how ill he might be feeling, and that you have to be half poet, half accountant to get your work done as a writer.
And what was your first publication?
It was called Project Space. It was a book about the NASA space program, and at one point I could tell you the difference between solid propellant and liquid propellant rocket engines, but don't ask me now.
I love your work. You speak not only to me, you speak for me in many, many, many ways.
Thank you.
Some of your writing that strikes me so are really very simple ideas, but I think they come from a very profound place, and I wonder if they come to you as simple ideas or if you have to synthesize a lot of thoughts before you arrive at those ideas.
Gee, I don't know how to answer that question. I think a lot of my thoughts just come together from the reading that I do and from the conversations that I have with my friends who are reasonably serious people asking serious questions, struggling to live moral, decent lives as members of a family and members of a community, trying to live for something beyond their own personal lives and trying to balance all of the private and public issues that all of us have to concern ourselves with. You know, I don't have any great bursts of insight. I have, you know, the slow slogging of working things out with a lot of good, thoughtful men and women with us talking to each other.
Was there a cost for leading that kind of life? Was there something you think maybe you missed out on or should have done?
You mean this disciplined life of? It doesn't feel that way. It doesn't feel as if I missed out. I feel as if my life was bursting with things. I look back and I mean, my son Alexander and his wife Marla have 3 children. I have never taken care of the 3 children together. I say, how could I take care of 3 children together? I raised 3 children. I can't remember how we did this, even with Milton's help, and how you did 3 children together. So I know I did it. I don't know how. But you know, one of the great luxuries of being a freelance writer, and my husband worked at home too. We worked like dogs, but we worked our own hours. So we got to go to the school plays, and we got to go to the pediatrician, and we got to be very, very involved in family life while being writers. Because we had the freedom of being freelance writers, nobody was our boss. So I think that helped. You know, maybe if I was going to an office every day, I would have had to pay a higher price than I wound up paying for trying to do all of this.
I have a question about the fact that you have 3 sons, which means 3 daughters-in-law. And I want to know if any of your poems concern that, because there has to be a lot of combination angst and funny things with that, with the relationships of the 3 daughters-in-law.
Absolutely. I think I have written probably very little about my daughters-in-law. I feel very, very lucky in the women that my sons have chosen. 2 out of the 3 marriages have been hugely successful. We've got 1 just divorced. And I think that I would count myself one of the luckiest women in the world in terms of the women who are currently my daughters-in-law.
Can you give us some background, like as
I went to college as a history major, came out, moved to Greenwich Village, where it was my intention to conquer the world of publishing. And I went job hunting, hoping that a combination of really tight dresses and my Phi Beta Kappa key were going to warn very brazenly, were going to help me infiltrate the world of publishing. No possibilities at all. My first job was as a garment district model, very low end, waterproof silk shantung dresses. Their waterproofness demonstrated by the buyer throwing water on me. This inspired me to learn shorthand and typing. I worked for Women's Wear Daily, and I tried to write something in fashion. They said, forget about it. I then worked for True Confessions, and I wrote a confession. These were as secretaries, because I had shorthand and typing. Wrote a confession story. They said, forget about it. I then worked, I finally got a job as a children's book editor, and wrote a children's book, which also got rejected. I was employed, but I did not have a word published until I got married, moved to Washington, D.C., and had as a husband somebody who was not only feeding me and supporting me, but also supporting me and encouraging me. And when this book on outer space, which was my first book, I came home from a job I had saying, they want me to write a book on outer space, and I don't even know where it is. He said, say yes, we'll figure out where space is later. which we did.
I actually meant to ask you about the 40, starting at 40 and then every 10 years writing, or 10 years or so, writing a different decade book.
Yeah.
And I wondered how that came about. And
Well, what happened, I mean, I think it was Kierkegaard who said, life happens forward, you can only understand it looking backward. I mean, my career looks as if it was impeccably planned. Because I'd been a children's book editor, when I moved to Washington, I got a job editing science books. Because I was in this place editing science books, when they needed somebody to write a book on space and the guy who was supposed to do it couldn't do it, they assigned it to me. And as I said, with a lot of help, loving support from my husband, I learned about space. And because I was then a published writer, the New York Herald Tribune, then a very flourishing newspaper, was looking for a stringer to cover society in Washington. So they said, well, she's published. They gave me that job. So here I am covering social life in Washington, and starting to write these poems. And I sent them to the Herald Tribune because, at least they knew me, they would look at them. And the Herald Tribune had just started a new magazine, which was to become an independent magazine, called New York Magazine. And New York Magazine published my poems, and they made me their house poet. It was just unbelievable. But you can see, New York Magazine would have never looked at my poems if I hadn't written about space, gotten through to there. And so there I was in the 1960s and 70s, in this magazine with Tom Wolfe and Gail Sheehy and Jimmy Breslin, and I was the poet of the magazine. I never wanted them to meet me because I figured that they were all so sophisticated they would hate my shoes and that would be the end of my career as a poet. But I kept on sending them stuff from Washington, and it really, it changed my life. It changed my life. And then I went on the Today Show, I don't know, like 8 months pregnant with Alexander, reading my poetry, and somebody called me up and said, would you like to write children's books? And I said, you bet. and that I started that. So it was really all just amazingly linked, as if I had planned it in some crafty way, which of course I hadn't.
I would like to know, since you are Phi Beta Kappa, element of discipline, reading, writing, are your children and grandchildren disciplined? Are they readers, writers also?
I think they are all quite disciplined and readers. Nobody is a professional writer, but probably the current star of the family is our 9-year-old granddaughter, Olivia, whose plans are to be an Olympic star and president of the United States, and whose only problem is, what if there's a big Olympic event when there's a world crisis? But I have every confidence that this kid is going to do that.
I was just wondering, do you do anything working with children? You were such an amazing inspiration.
With 7 grandchildren, I spend a lot of time each year doing presentations in the preschool, the first grade, the second grade. I do 7 a year.
I noticed, though, in your book it said that you did volunteer work in hospice, which
Yes.
is the other end of the
Yeah,
spectrum.
no, I've been a hospice volunteer for 21 years, every Monday from 9 to 12, and I love it. That's
That's-
very important to me.
Would you please tell us the story of how you and your husband met?
My husband and I met when we were 18 and 19. He was a waiter and I was a waitress at adjoining hotels at the Jersey Shore. We had a brief romance, decided that what we really were meant to be were buddies. And he went off to France on a Fulbright after college, and I was 1 year behind him and said I would join him as a buddy after I graduated. Instead, I got married, he got married, and we went our separate ways, and then our marriages broke up, and we found each other again and lived happily ever after.
Has turning 80 been traumatic in any ways for you? Do you accept it, or do you try to?
Well, actually, I'm only 79 and 10/12. And so far, I mean, I started saying I was 80 about a year ago because I figured it would keep me from having cardiac arrest when the day actually happened. But as it draws near, I am not finding it a problem in my life. I mean, my vision of 80 when I was a kid is so different from the 80 that I am and the 80 that my friends are. Life seems very open and full of joys and possibilities. That doesn't mean that 80 is the new 60. It is not. It is not. Lots of people we love get sick. We've been to a lot of funerals this year. Those are the realities. But I think that the main thing that 80 gives me is a very, very sharp sense of gratitude and a sense of love what you've got while you've got it.
What time of your life, looking back, would you say you liked the best? Your 40s, your 50s, your 60s?
What part of my life have I liked the best? Well, I am really liking my life right now, but I think that my favorite decade was my 50s, because I had sort of gotten over the 40s were very traumatic for me. I really understood I'm not going to be immortal, which was very annoying. And I was very aware that there were, I was never going to be a tennis star or a TV star, the woman for whom Paul Newman left Joanne, that there were things that were not going to happen. And I spent my 40s kind of sorting out the realization that there were limits to my life. And I used to talk about it when I would give lectures, and when I did, every single time somebody would come up to me and say, honey, wait till your 50s, it gets so much better. And it did. It was coming to terms with what what life's limits were, and coming to a better understanding of what your possibilities and gifts were. And not being as self-pitying, not being as self-centered, not being as dumb as you used to be. So I thought the 50s were really good. Thank you all very, very much.